Every person who experiences effortless increase noticed the same inner shift first. It had nothing to do with effort, luck, or timing, only what felt normal to them. Most people hear this verse and feel an immediate tightening inside. To him who has, more will be given. To him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. It sounds harsh, unfair, even cruel. It has been preached as a moral verdict, as if life itself were keeping score, rewarding the worthy and stripping the undeserving. Some hear it as divine favoritism. Others hear justification for inequality, but that reaction itself reveals the mistake. The verse was never speaking the language of morality. It was never addressing good people versus bad people. It was never about punishment or reward. It was describing something far more impersonal, far more intimate, and far more unavoidable: a law. This is where Neville Goddard makes a correction so radical that it unsettles the religious mind and the motivational mind at the same time. Scripture, he insists, is not a book of ethics. It is a psychological textbook written in symbolic language. Every verse is a description of how consciousness functions, not how it should function, not how we wish it would function, but how it does function, regardless of our opinions about it. When the verse says, "To him who has," it is not praising virtue. It is naming a condition. And when it speaks of taking away, it is not threatening punishment. It is describing consequence. The word having is where almost everyone goes wrong. It is assumed to mean possessions, money, status, opportunities, or visible results. But Neville is precise. Having is not about what is in your hands. It is about what is possessed inwardly as a state of being. What you have is what you are conscious of being, what you live from emotionally, what feels normal, familiar, and true to you without effort. The law does not respond to desire. It responds to possession. And possession in this context is psychological, not material. Neville often returns to the same image to explain this: consciousness as soil. Soil does not argue with the seed. It does not reward good seeds and punish bad ones. It multiplies whatever is planted in it according to its nature. Plant wheat, and wheat grows. Plant weeds, and weeds grow. The soil has no opinion, no morality, no preference. In the same way, consciousness multiplies whatever state is dominant within it. If fear is planted and lived from, fear expands. If confidence is planted and lived from, confidence expands. The law is neutral, but the results feel personal. What makes this so confronting is that it removes the comfort of blame and the comfort of hope at the same time. There is no external force deciding your fate, but there is also no bypass. The law is already operating. It has always been operating, and it is operating now in your life exactly where you are. Whether you understand it or not does not matter. Whether you agree with it or not does not matter. Just as gravity does not consult your beliefs before pulling, this law of consciousness does not wait for permission to replicate what you are being. Modern language is only now catching up to what Neville was pointing to decades ago. When Joe Dispenza speaks about repeated emotional states wiring the brain, reinforcing identity, and creating automatic patterns of perception and behavior, he is describing the same mechanism from a neurological angle. Repetition stabilizes a state. Stabilized states become identity. Identity produces predictable outcomes. The Bible encoded this in a single line, but we softened it, moralized it, and turned it into a story about fairness instead of function. This is why the verse feels uncomfortable when heard correctly. It does not flatter the ego. It does not offer excuses. It does not promise rescue. It simply reveals that whatever you are inwardly having, whatever state you are identified with, relaxed into, and emotionally at home in, must be given more life. And whatever is not genuinely possessed inwardly cannot be sustained, no matter how hard you try to hold it. The promise here is not comfort. The promise is clarity. By the end of this exploration, the verse will no longer sound like a threat or a judgment. It will sound like an instruction manual you are unknowingly following your entire life. You will begin to see why this law is neutral, unavoidable, and already shaping your outcomes, and why the only real question it ever asks is not whether you deserve more, but what you are actually having right now. If this law is shaping your life, subscribe now so awareness, not habit, decides what multiplies. The law is descriptive, not moral. At the heart of this verse is a misunderstanding so deep that it has shaped entire belief systems around guilt, worthiness, and reward. The human mind instinctively looks for judgment. It wants a moral referee, a cosmic authority deciding who deserves more and who deserves less. But the law being described here has no interest in character, effort, or intention. It does not evaluate you. It does not approve or disapprove. It simply functions. And this is precisely why Neville Goddard insisted that Scripture must be read as description, not prescription. Think of gravity. Gravity does not ask who is virtuous before it pulls. It does not hesitate because someone means well. Saints and criminals alike are subject to it. Step off a cliff and the law responds immediately and impersonally. No punishment is involved and no reward is being granted. The same is true of this verse. It is not announcing what should happen in a fair universe. It is revealing what does happen in a lawful one. Consciousness, like gravity, operates without commentary. This is where the idea of a reward system collapses. A reward system implies judgment, delay, and external authority. A replication system implies immediacy, neutrality, and internal causation. The verse is not saying, if you behave correctly, you will be given more. It is saying, whatever state you are already in possession of will be replicated. The law does not wait for you to improve. It does not ask for belief. It simply mirrors what is active. When the verse is read morally, it sounds cruel. When it is read psychologically, it becomes precise. Consciousness multiplies what is already alive within it. Not what you wish were alive, not what you talk about wanting, not what you admire in others. It multiplies what is active, dominant, and familiar. The law is not moved by declarations. It responds to states. And states are always present, always operating, whether acknowledged or not. This is why the verse feels unsettling when stripped of moral language. There is no villain to blame and no hero to appeal to. There is only a mechanism. If confidence is active, confidence expands. If doubt is active, doubt expands. If abundance is familiar, abundance grows. If lack is familiar, lack perpetuates itself. The law is not harsh. It is consistent. And consistency, when misunderstood, is often mistaken for injustice. Once this distinction is seen, the verse stops sounding like a verdict and starts sounding like a mirror. It is not pointing outward at society, fate, or God. It is pointing inward at the state you are living from. And that realization quietly shifts the entire meaning of the word having. Because if the law is truly neutral, then having cannot possibly mean owning objects or receiving rewards. It must mean something far more intimate, far more subtle, and far more decisive. When the verse says, "To him who has," the mind immediately reaches outward. It scans the visible world for evidence, possessions, titles, relationships, money, opportunities. This outward interpretation feels natural because we have been trained to measure reality by appearances. But the law being described does not operate on appearances at all. It operates on familiarity. What you have is not what you can point to. It is what feels normal to you, what you expect without thinking, what your nervous system treats as ordinary rather than exceptional. Having is not an event. It is a baseline. This is why Neville Goddard defines having as assumed normalcy. A state is not something you visit occasionally through effort or imagination. A state is something you live from. It is the emotional climate you return to when nothing is happening. It is what feels believable without proof. You do not need to convince yourself that your name is your name. You do not affirm it. You do not hope it is true. You simply know it, and that knowing is effortless. In the same way, whatever feels that natural to you inwardly is what you are having. A useful way to understand this is through the image of a thermostat. A thermostat does not heat a room by effort. It does not struggle or hope. It simply maintains a set point. When the temperature rises above that point, the system adjusts downward. When it falls below, the system adjusts upward. Your assumed state functions the same way. If abundance feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, or unreal, the inner system corrects back to the familiar level. If lack feels normal, it is effortlessly maintained. The law is not denying you anything. It is stabilizing what you already accept as normal. This is why unfamiliar good so often slips away. It is not because it was undeserved or prematurely given. It is because it was not matched by a corresponding state of having. The experience may appear briefly, just as a sudden burst of heat can warm a room, but without a changed set point, The system returns to its previous level. The loss is not punishment, it is regulation. Consciousness always seeks consistency with itself. When seen this way, the verse becomes disturbingly precise. To him who has, more will be given, because what is familiar expands. To him who has not, even what he has will be taken away, because what is unfamiliar cannot stabilize. The law is not impressed by possession. It responds to embodiment. It does not ask what you touched or experienced temporarily. It asks what you live from emotionally and expect as ordinary. This understanding quietly dissolves the fantasy that having is about accumulation. It reveals that having is about identity. What you identify with, what you assume to be true of yourself, what feels like this is just how life is for me, becomes the soil from which experiences grow. And once this is seen, a deeper question naturally emerges. If having is a state, and states determine outcomes, then what exactly does consciousness multiply when it gives more? Once having is understood as a state rather than a possession, the verse begins to reveal its mechanical nature. Consciousness does not deliberate. It does not pause to decide whether something should expand. It does not negotiate with circumstances. It does one thing, and it does it relentlessly. It multiplies what is already active. This is why the phrase feels so absolute. It is not poetic exaggeration, it is literal description. Consciousness only knows how to say more. The easiest way to grasp this is through the logic of compounding. Interest does not care whether the initial balance is large or small. It does not judge whether the money was earned nobly or foolishly. It simply multiplies what is there. A positive balance grows into more. A negative balance deepens into debt. The process is automatic, impersonal, and predictable. Consciousness functions the same way. Whatever state is active gains momentum. Whatever is repeated becomes reinforced. Whatever is reinforced begins to feel inevitable. This is why wealth appears to multiply wealth and lack appears to multiply lack, even when effort is equal. The multiplication is not happening at the level of action, it is happening at the level of state. A state carries expectations, perceptions, emotional reactions, and assumptions. Those assumptions subtly guide choices, interpretations, and behaviors without conscious intent. The law does not require desire to operate. It requires momentum. And momentum belongs to whatever is already in motion. This is also why intention alone does not change outcomes. Intention is directional, but momentum is generative. You can intend to go north while standing on a moving walkway heading south. The intention may be sincere, even passionate, but the movement continues according to what is already active. Consciousness does not multiply wishes, it multiplies states. And a state is not what you think once or say occasionally. It is what you return to when the mind relaxes. Here the verse becomes eerily exact. To him who has, more will be given, because the state he is in continues to expand itself. It cannot help but do so. To him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Not because something is being removed by force, but because the underlying state does not support retention. The subtraction is a natural byproduct of misalignment, not an act of punishment. When this is truly seen, blame dissolves, but so does fantasy. There is no enemy causing loss, and there is no external savior granting increase. There is only a law responding to what is active, and this raises a sobering question, one that the verse does not soften. If states multiply automatically, then loss must also have a cause. Something must explain why even what appears to be possessed can slip away. The second half of the verse often feels more threatening than the first, because it appears to contradict common sense. How can something be taken away if it was already possessed? Yet this is only confusing when possession is mistaken for ownership. The law does not recognize temporary access or surface-level experience as having. It recognizes embodiment, and anything that is not embodied cannot be sustained. A state that is not lived from is unstable, no matter how impressive the result looks from the outside. You can step into an experience briefly through effort, luck, or circumstance, but if your inner identification has not shifted, the experience remains borrowed. It is like living in a beautifully furnished house that you do not insure. As long as nothing happens, it appears secure. But the foundation was never claimed. The protection was never internalized. When pressure arrives, the arrangement collapses. This is why loss feels so personal, and yet follows such predictable patterns. What disappears is not taken away as punishment. It dissolves because the inner state that would sustain it was never present. The law is not removing something you had. It is revealing that it was never fully owned. Ownership in this context means identity. It means the state has become, "This is who I am," not "This is what I'm temporarily experiencing." Effort often disguises this lack of embodiment. Effort can create movement, but it cannot create stability. You can hold a state through willpower for a while, just as you can hold your breath, but strain is not possession. The moment the effort relaxes, the system returns to its default. The law is not impressed by how hard you tried. It responds to what you are identified with when you are no longer trying. Seen this way, the verse stops sounding cruel and starts sounding exact. Even what he has will be taken away does not mean loss is inevitable or malicious. It means that what is not rooted in identity cannot survive over time. Consciousness does not sustain contradictions. It does not maintain experiences that do not match the inner sense of self. Subtraction is not a decision made against you. It is the natural result of misalignment. This understanding quietly exposes why so many results fade, why breakthroughs reverse, and why effort alone never seems to hold. The law is not testing commitment. It is revealing structure. And once this structure is seen, the illusion that trying equals having begins to fall apart, making room for a much subtler and far more decisive distinction. Effort is not possession. There is a quiet but crucial difference between moving toward a state and living from it. Effort belongs to movement. Possession belongs to rest. The moment something is truly had inwardly, the strain disappears. This is why the law never responds to trying, no matter how disciplined or sincere the attempt may be. Trying is not neutral. It carries information. It announces absence. It reveals that the state has not yet been assumed as identity. Effort divides consciousness. One part reaches forward toward a desired condition, while another part remains anchored in the present sense of lack. The very act of striving confirms that the thing sought is not yet normal, not yet familiar, not yet owned. It is like rehearsing for a role that you never quite step into. The gestures may look convincing, the lines may be memorized, but the inner knowing of "this is who I am" has not arrived. And without that knowing, the law has nothing stable to multiply. This is why results born of effort feel fragile. They require maintenance, vigilance, and constant correction. The moment attention relaxes, the state dissolves. Effort can produce temporary change, but it cannot create permanence. Permanence belongs to identity. Consciousness does not stabilize what must be held together through force. It stabilizes what is assumed naturally, without internal argument. When striving is mistaken for possession, frustration quietly builds. The individual feels they are doing everything right, yet something always slips. This is not because the law is withholding, it is because the signal being sent is conflicted. On one level, there is desire, intention, and action. On another level, there is the ongoing feeling of not yet. The law responds to the dominant tone, not the declared goal. And the dominant tone of effort is separation. Once this is seen, the verse takes on a new clarity. To him who has, more will be given, because what is had does not require effort to maintain. It simply is. To him who has not, even what he has will be taken away, because what is held together by striving cannot endure. The law is not impressed by intensity. It responds to coherence. This realization naturally leads to a deeper inquiry. If effort signals absence and absence cannot be multiplied, then possession must be something far quieter and far more intimate. It must have nothing to do with proving, chasing, or forcing. It must be rooted in a different faculty altogether, one that does not ask for confirmation because it already knows. Feeling is the act of ownership. There is a form of knowing that does not require evidence, rehearsal, or repetition. It is quiet, settled, and unquestioned. You do not argue with it, and you do not attempt to strengthen it because it does not feel fragile. This is the quality of feeling that signals possession. Not emotion in the dramatic sense, but feeling as inner acceptance, as naturalness, as the absence of doubt. When something is truly had inwardly, it no longer needs support. This is why Neville Goddard places such emphasis on feeling. Feeling is not decoration added after belief. It is the substance of belief itself. To feel something as true is to accept it as fact at the level that consciousness actually responds to. You do not feel your name to be true through excitement or effort. You feel it as settled reality. That same quiet certainty is what constitutes ownership in any state. Consider how effortlessly you carry what you already accept. You do not wake up each morning trying to convince yourself of your age or your identity. There is no ritual involved. There is no checking for proof. The feeling of, "this is who I am," operates beneath thought, beneath intention. It simply is. And because it is stable, it perpetuates itself. Consciousness has something solid to work with. When a desired state is accompanied by anxiety, anticipation, or constant monitoring, it has not yet been owned. Those sensations are not evidence of depth, they are evidence of distance. Ownership feels surprisingly calm. It does not need reinforcement because it is not being questioned. This is why the law responds so precisely to feeling rather than effort. Feeling reveals what has been accepted as real. Once this feeling stabilizes, multiplication begins automatically. The state no longer needs protection or maintenance. It begins to express itself naturally through perception, expectation, and behavior without conscious planning. The world responds, not because it has been commanded to, but because consciousness has already shifted its center of gravity. What was once sought is now assumed. This is the subtle threshold where desire ends and having begins. Nothing dramatic marks the crossing. There is no announcement, no surge of emotion. There is simply a quiet sense of "this is mine," not in the sense of possession, but in the sense of identity. And from that point onward, the law does what it has always done. It gives more to what is already possessed, because possession has finally been established where it matters. There is a threshold between waking and sleep, where effort dissolves and the mind becomes receptive without resistance. In this state, the usual boundaries of logic, vigilance, and self-correction soften. This is the condition Neville referred to as the state akin to sleep, not as a technique but as a doorway. It is the moment when consciousness is no longer busy defending its old identity and is therefore capable of accepting a new one without conflict. What makes this state so powerful is not imagination itself, but the suspension of argument. During the day, the mind negotiates, evaluates, and compares. It asks whether something is realistic, deserved, or consistent with past experience. In the state akin to sleep, those questions lose urgency. The mind is no longer trying to manage reality, it is simply receiving impressions, and consciousness accepts impressions in this condition with far less resistance than it ever would while fully alert. A useful analogy is saving a file before shutting down a computer. While the system is active, changes can be made, tested, and revised, but unless the file is saved, nothing is retained. Sleep is the shutdown. The moments just before it are the save point. Whatever is accepted as real in that window is impressed upon the deeper level of consciousness, not as a wish, but as a fact. Once accepted there, it no longer requires repetition or reinforcement. This is why repetition is unnecessary once ownership is felt. Repetition is only required when doubt remains. When the feeling of possession is established in SATS, the state is no longer being installed. It has been installed. From that point on, the law does not need reminders. Consciousness begins to express the state naturally, just as it expresses any other identity that has been accepted without resistance. Neville Goddard was precise about this. SATS is not about visual detail or emotional intensity. It is about the feeling of the wish fulfilled being accepted as normal. The scene itself is secondary. The feeling of ownership is primary. When that feeling is present, the law has something to work with. The state has crossed from imagination into identity. This is why the verse feels so uncompromising once SATS is understood. To him who has, more will be given, because the state has been accepted at the deepest level where multiplication begins automatically. And this realization carries an unsettling implication. If the law responds to what is installed in consciousness, then something is always being installed. Whether intentionally or not, a state is always being accepted. The law never pauses. It is always working. The only question left is what it is currently multiplying. You are already multiplying something. There is a quiet discomfort that arises when this law is truly understood, because it leaves no room for neutrality. Consciousness is never idle. It is always active, always occupied by something, and whatever occupies it is being multiplied. The law does not begin working when you become aware of it. and it does not pause when you forget about it. It has been operating continuously, shaping outcomes long before you ever questioned how life works. The image that captures this most accurately is a conveyor belt that never stops moving. Something is always being carried forward. Awareness does not start the movement. It only reveals what is already on the belt. Consciousness functions the same way. It does not ask whether the state it is multiplying is helpful or harmful. It does not distinguish between faith and fear, confidence and doubt. It amplifies whatever is dominant with the same precision and consistency. This is what makes the verse sound severe when misunderstood. People assume the law prefers positive states and punishes negative ones. It does neither. It is neutral. It multiplies familiarity, not virtue. Whatever feels normal, whatever has been accepted without resistance, quietly gains momentum and expresses itself as experience. Outcomes are not sudden events. They are the visible continuation of inner states that have been in motion for some time. Seen this way, the verse loses its threatening tone and gains clarity. It is not warning of loss or promising reward. It is stating a fact. Consciousness is already multiplying something, it always has been, and what is multiplied is not what you want, but what you have. Choose what you are willing to have. When the verse is finally heard without fear or moral coloring, it reveals itself as something far more exact than a warning and far more honest than a promise. It is not speaking to behavior, worthiness, or virtue. It is speaking to identity. It is describing the mechanics by which consciousness relates to itself and then expresses that relationship as experience. The discomfort the verse creates is not accidental. It unsettles because it removes every familiar place where responsibility is usually placed outside the self. At this level, having is no longer something that happens to you. It is something you are. Consciousness does not ask what you admire, what you request, or what you hope will change. It responds only to what you are inwardly living from. Whatever state feels natural, familiar, and unquestioned becomes the reference point from which life unfolds. The law does not reward desire, because desire implies distance. It does not reward effort, because effort implies separation. It multiplies identity, because identity is stable. This is why the verse has nothing to do with fairness. Fairness belongs to moral systems. Laws of consciousness belong to structure. Just as the body responds to repeated physical habits by reorganizing itself, consciousness responds to repeated inner states by reinforcing them. This is not personal. It is intimate. It is impersonal in its operation and deeply personal in its effects. Life is not reacting to isolated thoughts or occasional emotions. It is responding to what has been accepted as normal. Neville Goddard returned again and again to the same central image: consciousness as soil. Soil does not decide what should grow. It does not evaluate the seed's history or potential. It simply receives what is planted and produces according to its nature. In this analogy, life is not the source. Life is the harvest. The source is always the state that has been planted and left undisturbed long enough to take root. This is why the verse feels final. Whatever state is inwardly possessed must expand into more. It cannot do otherwise. And whatever is not truly possessed, no matter how briefly it appears, cannot remain. This is not loss as punishment. It is loss as revelation. It reveals what was never stabilized at the level of identity. Consciousness does not maintain contradictions between what is experienced and what is believed to be normal. When this is understood, the verse stops demanding emotional reactions. It does not ask for agreement or approval. It simply states a fact. You are already having something. You are already identified with a state, and that state is already being multiplied. The future is not being decided later. It is being extended now from what is currently held within. The freedom in this understanding is subtle but profound. It does not lie in controlling outcomes or forcing change. It lies in recognizing that identity precedes experience. When identity shifts, experience follows naturally, without strain or enforcement. The law does not need to be persuaded. It needs to be understood. In this light, the verse no longer threatens or comforts. It instructs with precision. What you have in consciousness must be multiplied. There is no exception to this principle. There is only awareness of it. And with that awareness, the responsibility becomes clear, not as burden, but as clarity. Choose what you are willing to have. because whatever is inwardly possessed will inevitably become more. Subscribe to train your consciousness. What you have will keep multiplying.